You make the last payment. Maybe it's online, one click, no fanfare. Maybe you write an actual check just to feel it in your hand one more time. Either way, something in your chest loosens. The house is yours, really yours. No bank, no lender, no 30-year countdown hanging over your kitchen table anymore. I'm Walter, and if you're new here at Walter's Retirement Corner, this is exactly the kind of thing we break down every week. The stuff that sounds simple on the surface, but changes the moment you actually live inside it. And that feeling you have on payoff day, it's real, it's earned, you should be proud of it. But here's what almost nobody tells you in that moment. A paid-off house is not the same thing as financial safety. It feels like the finish line. For a lot of retirees, it's actually the start of a different kind of math. One where the biggest asset you own can't buy groceries, can't cover a hospital copay, and can't pay the plumber unless you sell it or borrow against it. Later in this video, I'll tell you about a retired teacher named Robert. Mortgage-free, proud of it, felt about as secure as a person can feel right up until 18 months later, when one phone call changed everything his paid-off house could actually do for him. What happened next is exactly why we're having this conversation today. This is not about whether you should pay off your mortgage. This is not about interest rates or timing the market or being irresponsible with your money. This is about something simpler and something almost nobody explains clearly. What paid off actually means once you're living on a fixed income, and why the number on your net worth statement and the money in your checking account are not the same thing at all. Stay with me, because this next part matters more than most people realize. Here's why that finish line feeling can be misleading. When most of us think about being financially secure, we picture a number: net worth, assets minus debts. And on paper, a paid-off home makes that number look fantastic. $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, sometimes more, sitting right there in your name, no debt attached to it at all. But there's a difference between what you're worth and what you can actually spend. Financial people call this liquidity. It just means how quickly and easily something can turn into real, usable cash. The kind you can hand to a pharmacist or a contractor without a long delay or a painful discount. Cash in a checking account is liquid. A dividend check is liquid. Your house is not. You cannot mail a shingle to the electric company. You cannot pay a hospital bill with a square foot of your living room. To turn your home into spendable money, you generally need to sell it or borrow against it. And both of those come with strings attached that a bank account simply doesn't have. Now here's where it gets important. Every dollar you put into paying off your mortgage early is a dollar that stopped doing anything else. Financial planners call this opportunity cost. It just means what you gave up by choosing one option instead of another. If you used $200,000 to pay off a mortgage that was charging you a low, locked-in rate, that's $200,000 that's no longer sitting in an investment account, quietly growing, quietly producing income you could actually spend every single month. That trade-off matters more in retirement than at any other point in your life. When you're working, if the market has a bad year, you have time. You have a paycheck coming. You can wait it out. Once you're retired and living off what you've saved, you don't get that same runway. You're the one drawing down the account, not adding to it. So the assets that pay you monthly income, the ones that stay liquid, start to matter in a completely different way than they did at 35. And this isn't some rare, unusual situation. Americans are sitting on trillions of dollars in home equity right now, more real estate wealth than most people realize. But almost none of that is spendable without a sale, a loan, or a line of credit. A lot of retirees look wealthy on paper. Meanwhile, month to month, they're living paycheck to paycheck off Social Security, wondering where all that wealth actually went. That gap between what you're worth and what you can actually spend is where the real risk hides, not in the mortgage, not in the house itself, in the assumption that being debt-free automatically means being financially safe. If this is making you rethink how you look at your own house, hit subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of conversation we have every week here on Walter's Retirement Corner. The stuff that sounds boring until it's your kitchen table it's happening at. And if you've already paid off your home or you're a few years from it, drop a comment and tell me where you stand. I read every one, and it helps me figure out what to break down next. Now let's get into exactly how this plays out, and the 4 things about home equity that most retirees never get told. Rule number 1. A paid-off house doesn't pay your bills. It just stops charging you one. There's a real difference between those two things, and it's easy to blur them together. A stock that pays a dividend, a bond that pays interest, even Social Security, those deposit real money into your account every month. Money you can spend on groceries or a plane ticket to see your grandkids. Your home equity does neither. It just sits there, quietly growing or quietly shrinking with the market, completely disconnected from your monthly cash flow. Rule number 2. Selling isn't free money, even when it feels like it should be. Say your home is worth $400,000, no mortgage left. You might picture that as $400,000 in your pocket the moment you sell. It's not. Between broker commissions, title fees, closing costs, and often some repairs the buyer wants before closing, you can lose a meaningful chunk of that number before you ever see a dollar. And that's before you've figured out where you're actually going to live next, and what that's going to cost you. Rule number 3, and this is the one that surprises people the most. Even if you plan to tap your equity later instead of selling, through something like a HELOC, a home equity line of credit that lets you borrow against your house the way a credit card lets you borrow against your income, that access isn't free either. It isn't even guaranteed. Rates on these products have stayed high. Approval depends on your credit, your income, and how much equity you actually have. The plan to just borrow against the house if I need to sounds simple sitting here today. It gets a lot more complicated when you're 74, retired, and trying to qualify for a new loan. Here's what most people get wrong about all of this. They think of their house as a backup plan, an emergency fund with a roof on it. But a real emergency fund is something you can access in an afternoon with a phone call or a few clicks. Your house, as a backup plan, can take weeks, sometimes months. And in an actual emergency, weeks and months are exactly what you don't have. Which brings us to rule number 4, concentration risk. That's just a fancy way of describing what happens when too much of your total wealth is tied up in one single place. If your house makes up 60, 70, 80% of everything you own, you don't have a diversified retirement. You have a very nice house and not much else you can actually use. This is not a reason to panic. This is not a reason to sell your house tomorrow. This is not a reason to feel like you did something wrong by paying it off. This is a reason to ask one honest question. If something went wrong next month, the furnace, a hospital stay, a new roof, how much of that could you cover without touching the house at all? For a lot of retirees, the honest answer is, not much. And that's exactly where Robert's story comes in. Let me show you what this actually looks like in real life, not in theory, in practice. Diane is 67, lives in Ohio, and paid off her $340,000 home 2 years before she retired. She felt fantastic about it. Debt-free, finally, after 30 years of payments. Then in the same year, the foundation cracked and she needed knee surgery. 2 bills, back to back. And she had almost nothing sitting in liquid savings because for years, every extra dollar had gone straight into the house. She ended up opening a home equity line of credit just to cover it, at a rate far higher than her old mortgage had ever charged her. The house she'd worked so hard to own outright became, in that moment, the very thing standing between her and the cash she needed. Now, remember Robert, the retired teacher from the beginning of this video. Robert made his last mortgage payment at 64 in North Carolina and felt exactly the way you'd expect. Secure. Done. Free. He had $280,000 in home equity and a modest pension, and on paper that looked like more than enough. 18 months later, His wife was diagnosed with a serious illness. The medical bills started arriving before the treatment plan was even fully mapped out, and Robert discovered fast that $280,000 in home equity does not move quickly. He couldn't sell the house. They needed to live in it, especially now. He hadn't set up a HELOC in advance, so he was applying for one under pressure at 70-something years old with a spouse in treatment, hoping a lender would say yes in time. Now picture the other version of Robert. Same house, same diagnosis, same bills, but this version of Robert, back when he made that last mortgage payment, had done one more thing. He'd opened a small HELOC while he still qualified easily, not because he needed it, but because having it costs nothing until you use it. He kept 3 to 6 months of expenses in an account he could touch in an afternoon. When the diagnosis came, he wasn't scrambling to prove his income to a loan officer while sitting in a hospital waiting room. He already had the door open. He just had to walk through it. Same house, same equity, same emergency, completely different 18 months. That's not luck. That's not about being wealthier than Robert actually was. That's about the difference between having access and just having equity. And then there's Carol and Jim, 70 and 71 in Arizona. They did something that felt almost uncomfortable at the time. They kept a small mortgage going into retirement instead of paying it off early, at a rate low enough that their investments kept growing faster than the loan was costing them. When their own emergency came, a major roof repair, not long after Jim's own health scare, they didn't panic, and they didn't scramble. The cash was already sitting there, liquid, waiting. Their portfolio barely noticed. Their house was never the plan, it was just the house. None of these are stories about who was smarter or who worked harder or who deserved a better outcome. They made almost identical decisions. The difference was liquidity, access, having a way to reach your money before the emergency shows up at your door, not after. So let's bring this all together, because none of this means what you think it means at first glance. Takeaway 1. A paid-off home lowers your expenses, but it doesn't create income. Those are two different jobs, and your house can only do one of them. Takeaway 2. If most of your net worth is sitting in your house, you likely have less real flexibility than your net worth statement suggests. And that gap is exactly what turns a manageable emergency into a genuine crisis. Takeaway 3, and this is the one to actually act on. Before you assume your paid-off home is your safety net, ask what you could cover in the next 30 days without touching it at all. If the honest answer makes you uncomfortable, that's not a reason to panic. It's a reason to build a little more liquidity around the house you already worked so hard to own. Now, everyone's situation is a little different. Your health, your family, your income, the rate on any mortgage you still carry, all of it matters. So take what you learned here today and use it as a starting point for a real conversation with a licensed financial advisor who can look at your full picture, not just your home equity. Here's my question for you. If an unexpected $15,000 expense showed up next month, could you cover it without touching your house? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and it genuinely shapes what we cover next here on Walter's Retirement Corner. Because the goal was never just to own your home outright. The goal is to feel safe. And those two things, it turns out, aren't always the same.